Hello, my random viewers, and welcome to Randomly Offensive. Today, I will be covering Julia Chang from Tekken and be telling her story because I feel like doing small stories in between the big stories, for example, just getting off of Nina's storyline, is a nice way to break up the pace and fill in little gaps while also just taking a small break from those long stories. And so Julia Chang is the one I've chosen to do that. With that being said, let's hop right into her story. Michelle Chang from Tekken 1 and 2 is wandering her land as she is gathering food and hears the cries of a baby, and so Michelle goes towards the cries and sure enough sees an abandoned baby girl. And though she looks to try to find any sign of the parents, there is no sign. It becomes clear to her that this child was abandoned, and so she takes the child in and names her Julia Chang and raises her as her own. And so, for the next 18 years, as Julia grows up, she grows up with a loving mother of Michelle Chang. Julia also gets really into archaeology, and when she turns 18, she goes to college to study archaeology. She also has been trained in martial arts by Michelle because Michelle knows what kind of threats are out there, and Julia has just grown up in the wildlife, living off of what the land provides, living in a very natural lifestyle. And so Julia has one of the most normal lives in the Tekken roster, but that all gets shaken when one day Julia starts hearing about all of these missing fighters, all these missing martial artists who just have disappeared. And she is also noticing that her land, the land she lives off of, the land she's grown up with, and the animals that she's grown passion for are starting to die and wither away. And she is noticing signs, as she studies her archaeology, she is noticing signs that this is happening throughout the entire world, and she decides that she needs to investigate what it is. And so, during the investigations, she ends up getting an encrypted email telling her to meet this person, this mysterious person, in a coordinates that was sent in the middle of nowhere. And as she goes there to meet this mysterious person, it is no other than the young man Lee. And Lee tells her that he has noticed she has been researching in why the world is starting to dissipate, and she's also been looking into why martial artists have been missing. He then explains to her that the martial artist missing is an exact result of Heihachi kidnapping powerful beings, powerful people, to do experiments on and try to turn them into adapted humans. And that one of his dear friends, Nina Williams, is too going through the same experiments. He then explains to her that Heihachi is experimenting on much, much more than human beings, but he is also studying on the planet itself, trying to find any signs of more threats like the ogre. And he's also been trying to find the ogre. And so at this point, Heihachi is causing the worlds and the wildlife on the planet to dissipate due to all of the research and all the kind of chemicals that are being released when he is researching onto the earth and digging these giant sites using his corporation, the Mishima Zaibatsu, the Tekken Force, and starting all these mines, trying to find ways to predict or find other threats such as Ogre and the Azazel and Jinpachi. And so Julia, with this information, tells Lee thank you and goes to enroll in the third Iron Fist tournament. However, she is denied, so she decides to sneak in to the third King of the Iron Fist and confront Heihachi. As Lee and Julia split ways, Lee returns to his home, and he has a chessboard that has already been somewhat played, but the game's not finished, and he moves one more piece with a smile, calling Julia the pawn as he slides the pawn one square forward. And so Julia sneaks into the third King of the Iron Fist tournament and waits until she can find Heihachi. The third King of the Iron Fist tournament starts, and as all these competitors are fighting, she looks around and cannot see Heihachi. So she sees a temple nearby and she goes to the temple. The ogre has yet to surface, and she sees Heihachi sitting there meditating. And so she walks in and confronts Heihachi. She sits down in front of him and he opens one eye and acknowledges her and then closes his eyes again to continue meditating, and she sits there quietly waiting. And then when he is finished meditating, he pours her a cup of tea. "What are you doing here?" he asks. And she says that the world is dissipating due to his experiments, and that the wildlife she cares about so much is dissipating and dying, and that many people have gone missing, and he is the culprit. He looks at her somewhat sad and tells her that he is a horrible man, and he has done horrible things, and that he will continue to do horrible things because the world depends on it, and saving the world requires him to do things that no other man is willing to do. And she doesn't know how to take this, and she disagrees with Heihachi, telling him that he can save the world without being a monster, and he disagrees and kicks her out of the temple, walking away from this knowing that she failed to confront Heihachi, but she successfully got the information she needed and confirmed that Heihachi was the cause of all the turmoil. She decides to continue her studies, and so she graduates from college and becomes an amazing scientist, and she works alongside Lee, and she works in the G Corporation, and Lee and her join together to create a solution for all the turmoil that is being caused by the Mishima Zaibatsu. The fourth King of the Iron Fist tournament is then announced, and she decides that this is the best way to confront Heihachi once again, but also this is her chance to beat Heihachi and take over the Mishima Zaibatsu, and that will allow her to fix all the damage being done to the land and wildlife to cease. And so now she decides that that is her goal, to take over the Mishima Zaibatsu, but she knows that defeating Heihachi will be no easy task. And as she tells Lee about this, he informs her that he too has enlisted for his own personal reasons. However, there is a man named King who has reached out to him to use his science to improve his training, and that she can take advantage of this. And so Julia and Lee set up a home on a farm, and they train and help King, Makujin, and Kuma as all these people train together. And Julia becomes friends with King, seeing that King is an incredibly kind-hearted man whose only goal is to take care of orphans, but also to have revenge on the murderer that killed his father figure. And so as they are training, they begin to build a bond, and I go much more into it in King's story if you have yet to see that. And so the 4th King of the Iron Fist tournament starts, and the first round she goes up against no other than Bryan Fury, and Bryan is a beast. He's a monster of a man. We have covered him a couple times in the past, and if you have missed my previous videos, I will have a playlist that will keep growing pinned at the end of this video, and you can witness Nina fighting Bryan and witness Paul Phoenix's story and Heihachi's story and other character stories that are growing alongside these characters. But for now, we are going to delve into the fight between Julia Chang and Bryan Fury. Bryan charges towards Julia with enough force that the ring already shakes just by his footstep, and Julia is incredibly intimidated by this, and Bryan thrusts a massive punch directly towards the face of Julia. However, she sidesteps gracefully, tilts her head to the left, and the punch goes past her. She can then see his elbow bending, getting ready to turn his punch into a side-thrusting elbow, so she puts her hand on the elbow to make it so that it can't. But to her surprise, Bryan just does it anyway, as if her hand was never even there, as if her strength was irrelevant to this man, and it connects to the temple of Julia, knocking her down. She quickly gets back up, however, because Bryan was obviously about to strike her again while she was down. And so now Bryan is throwing these massively strong, but yet incredibly fast attacks and combos with brutal kicks that are aiming for her lower body, while delivering massive punches aiming for her head and her chest. And she is gracefully maneuvering around them, dancing around the ring. However, she cannot see a pattern. She cannot see a fluid motion in Bryan. It's almost as if Bryan's attacks are just having no rhyme or reason, but yet at the same time are beautifully executed. And so she's having to use pure wit in order to dodge him, pure reaction time, because she can't predict the next move. And so every time she tries to find an opening to strike, she doesn't even have time to pull the trigger on it because of how fast Bryan is sending out these combinations. And so she just continues dancing around Bryan. She then notices that Bryan is not getting tired, nor is he even breaking a sweat, and he's laughing the entire time. And every time he connects with Julia, it breaks bones, it knocks the wind out of her, it makes her dazed, and her legs are starting to shake, and the fight has barely just begun, and she doesn't know how to handle this man. So then she managed to sidestep, and she sees an opening, so she sends her hand with a side karate chop directly to his throat. She then rotates her hand around as she turns her karate chop into a grasp around his jaw, and as she comes down, she yanks his face downwards, hoping to put a kink in his neck. She then dives up with a massive uppercut connecting to the side of his face. She then shoves her heel into the left ankle of Bryan and then twists her foot to the right, snapping the ankle of Bryan. And then simultaneously while doing this, she picks up her other leg and delivers a roundhouse to the lower back of Bryan, causing his back to bend, making any strike to the lungs much more severe. And so then she delivers a massive rounding elbow directly to the windpipe of Bryan. But then Bryan just immediately, without hesitation, recoils and strikes back with a solid punch, throwing her across the ring. As she gets up, she notices that Brian is feeling no pain and that his strikes are far too strong for any normal man. And so she looks at him and tells him, or at least asks him, "You are one of those advanced human types." And he nods very excitedly and tells her that he has no equal and that he is the embodiment of perfection. And she tells him that she is sorry for what the Mishima Zaibatsu has done to him, and she charges to him to try to continue the fight. When she throws a punch, he dodges it and then connects an armbar right against her throat, slamming her to the ground, and then he begins to choke her out while picking her back up, and he whispers in her ear, "Not the Mishima Zaibatsu, the G Corporation." And Julia is terrified at this, to know that the G Corporation is committing the same sins as the Mishima Zaibatsu, the company that she has been working for. And so he flips her upside down and slams her to the ground, knocking her out, making the win go to Brian Fury. After the tournament, she decides to go to the G Corporation, and she breaks in to her own facility and starts studying on everything, pulling up encrypted files, pulling up encrypted emails, and she realizes that the G Corporation has been doing the same testings. And not only that, but they have been testing upon a man named Jack and creating multiple different versions and clones of this man. And hearing and listening and reading and watching the story of Jack starts making her cry, and she realizes that her mother, Michelle, too tried to save Jack from this eternal torture that he has had to endure and to go through. And that is when her boss, Dr. T, walks in, and he explains to her that what they are doing must be done to combat the Mishima Zaibatsu, because the Mishima Zaibatsu is becoming strong enough using their technological advances and their experiments. They become strong enough to rule the world, and that can never happen. But Julia doesn't accept it. This is the same reasoning Heihachi gave her years ago, and so she decides that her research, her work, will not be used for this evil, and deletes every file, knowing that it will delete and erase all the research she has done to save the land and to save the wildlife and to protect her homeland. And of course, she manages to escape before security shows up. And going into Tekken 5, Julia, of course, sees on the news that King's arch rival Marduk has worn the face of Armored King, and so she knows that King is gonna go and face Marduk, and she goes to stop her friend from going down a bad path. And I cover that story in the story of King, so if you have not seen that, absolutely go back and check it out, maybe. So after she wakes up from being knocked out by King, she rises and she decides that she is going to do her own research, not work for a company, and try to find a way to recultivate the land that is deterring on the planet. And so in her research, she is contacted by an old woman, and she goes to see this old woman in Arizona. And when she sees the old woman tells her that she is aware that Julia has had meetings and has seen Kazuha and Heihachi and has been in the same tournament as Jin, and tells her of a prophecy and of a vision that she had, that if Kazuha and Jin meet, if Kazuha and Jin come together, they will destroy the world. If Kazuha and Jin actually fight, they will destroy the entire planet. And so Julia does not believe this, but then with the Tekken 6 events, as she watches as Jin starts World War III and Kazuha is the opposing side, she realizes that that prophecy is coming true. And so she calls Lee and she tells Lee everything. And so Lee, while moving more pieces on his chessboard, somewhat smiling and then getting frustrated and smiling again with every piece he moves, with everything that Julia tells him, he then responds with, "Nina is gone, but you could probably save this planet. Let me concoct a plan and I'll figure it out." Lee sends her an alias so that she can go and work back at the G Corporation undercover as a mole. And so she managed to sneak into the corporation as a low-level employee, and she collects information as much as she can and sends everything she knows to Lee, with Lee consistently moving the pieces on his chessboard, telling himself that he is getting closer and closer and closer, and just maybe, the world will be saved. And so, with this going on, Julia is finally discovered, and Kazuha has her imprisoned inside the G Corporation, and she is there alone in her thoughts. And Lee has not been able to get a hold of her. He begins to worry and contacts the rogue Tekken 4 soldier Lars and tells him that there is a friend that he needs to be rescued and that he will give him the coordinates he needs to find Jin and Azazel, but he must release Julia. And so Lars and Alyssa go and break into the G Corporation. They engage in a massive gun battle and they make it to Julia. They break her out and they tell her that they were sent by her friend Lee. And so they split ways and Julia manages to escape. When she contacts Lee, he tells her that he managed to find Nina, Asuka, Paul, and Exalyu, and even Steve Fox, and together they were able to beat Kazuha and make sure Kazuha and Jin never face off, keeping the prophecy at bay for now. So Julia is relaxed, and there is nothing much more that she can do, and she has no part in Tekken 7. The last we see of Julia Chang is her on the phone with Lee, and Lee tells her that he will not be seeing her again, for he has a lot of work to do, and it involves many other people. She then decides to ask him, what have your motivations been this whole time? What is your end game? What is your plan? What are you trying to achieve? And Lee looks into the phone and responds with, I am whatever I want to be, and you are wherever you are needed. She interrupts him. Yes, I've heard it before. Very mysterious, very cool. And she hangs up the phone, and she looks into the sky, knowing that she did everything that she could have done. And as she goes back to her home, with the land slowly dying away, she continues her research and spends days and days, weeks and weeks, months and months, trying to create a formula to save her land. And the very last thing we see is her putting a syringe into a tree, and the tree sprouting flowers and leaves and becoming green once again. And that is the conclusion and the origin to Julia Chang. I would have loved to do a multiple-part story of Julia, but she just doesn't have a huge story in the Tekken franchise. And she is not canon in Tekken 7, because Tekken 7, they started doing this weird thing where they were introducing characters that you have to buy way after the game was released, and it's kind of annoying, and it makes it complicated figuring out what characters are suddenly canon and the characters that were never canon, even though they're in the game now. So Julia, unfortunately, was one of those characters that was never canon in Tekken 7. With that being said, if you listened for this long, and if you enjoyed, please do consider hitting the like and subscribe button. I really appreciate you watching, I appreciate you listening, and if you really liked it, consider hitting the share button. It helps me out a lot. I'm a small channel. Do not get hit by a meteor. Take care of yourselves, and bye.